All right, this is not in your textbook, but or some parts are in different places, but it's a huge part of understanding what I call how to build a police officer. And basically, to hire, train, and get through probation to get what I call a quote unquote baby police officer, which is one that's just trained but still has a lot of learning to do, takes a minimum of 2 years. And we're going to kind of go through that process. Okay, so policing is a really difficult and complex career. Cops are called upon to play psychiatrist, social services, mediator, doctor, lawyer, judge, jury sometimes, priest, counselor, fighter, dog catcher. The list goes on and on. I have lists that fill up pages and pages because we are in a era of 911 call a cop, get a cop, because people, when they don't know who to call to get an answer, 911 is the easiest. So, and that's kind of scary because cops are trained, but they're not trained, for example, as psychologists. They don't have PhDs. They don't spend 1,500 hours in internships going through therapy and learning how to diagnose different personality and social disorders, all different kinds of things. And especially when dealing with the mentally ill, one of the first things that sets off a lot of those members of the public that are mentally ill are somebody in uniform. And so, if you have a situation where you have the public safety at harm, at risk, or laws being broken, police should respond. But there are a lot of other things out there that police are responding to that they have some training for, but definitely not the training that other populations are trained for. So police officers have to be experts in communication. They have to know counseling, crisis intervention strategies. They have to defuse potentially volatile domestic disturbances. And these are just some of the things they have to do. So it's very multifaceted work. And even though you may have officers out there that aren't corrupt, they make bad decisions because there's so much to do and so much to learn. And like I said, after 2 years, you get quote unquote a baby cop that's gone through the training, but it takes years to really learn how to do the job. And even then, you're always learning. Any good cop I've ever heard has said, when I stop learning, I'll retire, because you're continuously learning. You get better at making decisions and making them quickly, but you're always learning. Okay, so there's 4 types of police training. One is what we call basic recruit training. That's the police academy. 2 is field training. That's after you get out of the academy and you put everything you learned from the textbooks and from all the experts you had into real world work where you're wearing the uniform and you're actually going to calls. But you're with a field training officer that has been trained specifically how to train you, so you're still not by yourself. You have in-service training now after you've become a cop. Depending what state you're in, there's certain peace officer standards, such as firearm qualification, defensive tactics, all kinds of different training that you not only have to get, but you have to keep up on it yearly. And then specialized training. So if you want to go into SWAT or canine or vice, depending what you're going into, there's all kinds of specialized training as well. Okay, so after a candidate is offered the job, so after the candidate has gone through the hiring process, they have to attend a police academy. Now, since 1989, the duration and the variety of topics during the police academy has gone up. And now, depending on what state and what academy you go to, you're 600 hours or more of training, which is really about 5 or 6 months the candidates are spending in a police academy. So I want to go back really fast. So just remember, this is after the candidate has filled out a job application, after the candidate has gone through the written exam and passed it, passed an oral board interview, passed the physical agility test, passed the background check, passed, depending what state you're on, which we'll get to in future chapters, the lie detector test, passed the medical physical, and then if there's a final chief or sheriff's interview, after they've been hired, that's when they're offered, psych eval, I forgot about the psychological evaluation. After all of that, they are then offered a job and they go through the academy. and they have to pass the academy. So once they pass the academy, they're still not official cops. They can't ride a car by themselves. So again, if they pass the academy, they start what's called either the field training program, FTO, or police training program, PTO, just depending on the police department. And there's a considerable gap of what's taught in the academy and by, like I said, the textbooks and the experts to what really happens on the streets. So it's a long learning process. And field training, the FTO or PTO process, generally consists of 4 phases. During the first phase, that new officer doesn't know a lot, so they're doing about 0 to 25% of the work, while the first FTO, the field training officer, does about 75%. Now, field training officers are trained on how to train, and there's a daily evaluation process that the new officer gets evaluated on, and there's meticulous notes, and it's a whole lot of information getting thrown at you. The new officer's generally not driving in this phase, and it's just getting overloaded with, hey, you've learned all this in the academy, here's what you do. And generally that lasts for 4 weeks, about a month. You can get extended in any phase, and that can go, generally 1 to 2 weeks or 3 to 4 weeks, depending on what issues may be surfacing and what additional training that new officer needs. In the second phase, now it's about 50-50. So the new officer will probably start driving during this phase, but it's really difficult to drive and do these things as well. You're having to listen to the radio, learn directions, get yourself somewhere, see where the other officers are. There's just a lot going on, and it takes a while for all of that to really start making sense. The third phase, now the officer's doing about 75% of the work. They're driving all the time. The FTO's doing only about 25% of the work. And we're in the 3rd month probably about now. And then the final 4th phase is the officer's doing all the work, and the FTO is not doing any. Generally during this phase, which is the 4th phase, the FTO will either or do both. Maybe for 1 week they'll wear plain clothes and they'll ride like they're going on a ride along, and they'll let the new officer do all the work. And then maybe for the next week, they'll follow the officer as a backup officer to any call that officer goes to, just to see how they're doing. So now that person's been through the hiring process, they've got offered a job, they've been through the academy. Now they've been through generally about a 4-month field training process. And you think, oh, they're done. No, they're not, because now they're quote unquote just still a baby officer. So after they've done all this, and you're looking at over 1.5 years, they still have to pass probation. Depending on the department, that's generally between 18 and 24 months. And this is where the officer's working by themselves. They don't have a field training officer, but their sergeant is really supervising them and meeting with them and making sure everything's going all right. So this officer goes through a lot. The first 2 years are very, very difficult. All right, so how are law enforcement agencies different? They're set up a little differently, and we're gonna introduce students to a few things here, and then we'll reaffirm them in some later chapters as well. Okay, so there's different types of law enforcement agencies. As you can see on the right, we have in the upper left, we have Sheriff of Jackson County Sheriff's Office. In the right, we have Ashland Police Department Chief of Police. Bottom right, you have the Chief of Police for Central Point PD. So in a certain area, somebody could be a commission, which we've talked about for law enforcement for county, for a city or municipality, park police, university police, or as SOU has, public safety. There can be correction officers at the jail or detention center, or prison officers. You can have bailiffs inside the courts. You can have tribal police. There's marshal offices. There's just federal law enforcement, just lots of different law enforcement agencies and opportunities for those interested in jobs in law enforcement. So chiefs or sheriffs, we've kind of talked about this before, but we're going to kind of go over that. And I kind of point an arrow to what are those stripes along Chief O'Mara's sleeve. Well, what those are generally is years of service. With my department, for each stripe, that counts as 4 years of service. So if you had 5 stripes, that means you had 20 years on. So every department's kind of different. It just really depends on the agency. Also stars. Your chiefs or your sheriffs are going to have stars. I've seen sheriffs that have 2 stars, 3 stars, and 4 stars. Same with chiefs. It really just depends on the agency. But if you're seeing 2 stars or stars, you know you definitely have a top cop or chief or sheriff. All right. Every agency will have what's called an organizational chart. So I highly recommend if you're doing any research into an agency or you want to get hired by an agency, go Google or look up, research the organizational chart for that sheriff's office or that police department because it's going to show you all the different divisions that they have. And you can see, hey, if I go work for the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, as is shown here, I can go into SWAT or canine or traffic. It just search and rescue, Marine, Forest Patrol. It shows you the different areas that you're able to go into. So they're pretty cool to look at what type of career you could have in all the different areas you could go into. Okay, so what is the norm for how many officers a city or county should have to be safe? Well, according to IACP, which we've talked about before, and CALEA as well, which is the Commission on Accreditation, there should be about 16 to 21 officers for every 10,000 residents. So let's look at Ashland Police Department. Right now, if Ashland has 20,000 residents, it should have between 33 and 42 officers to be operating safely according to the standards that are set. All right, and you can obviously go look at the population. Here's just a look at the population of the various cities that are close to Ashland. All right, jurisdiction. This is really important. In Oregon, we have over 170 law enforcement agencies because look at all these jurisdictions. These are just the number of counties we have that have sheriff's offices. And inside each county, so if you look at the bottom left, you see Jackson County. Well, you should know you've got Ashland, the city of Ashland and Ashland Police Department. You have Talent, city of Talent, Talent Police Department, Central Point Police, and so on and so forth. So each county has their own jurisdictions, plus there's tribal police, there's university or public safety. So there's lots of different law enforcement agencies. All right, also each agency will have their own way that they separate the city. So this is kind of an older area command separation of Ashland Police Department, but you can see Ashland set up their area into 5 different areas. And you can see where they're at. And generally you'll have a sergeant or you'll have officers assigned to those. So if anything happens, not that any officer can't respond to any calls anywhere, but when they're free, they will focus on those areas more. Here's Medford. You can actually look those up online and go look at their different police beats and how they're set up. And this is where I worked. This was an older map, but this used to be how our district and neighborhoods were set up. All right, that ends this presentation.